In the last video, we talked about warfare, but it focused almost exclusively on the men. So what about the women in the Aztec Empire? What was it like to be a lady? What did it take to be one? And did girls really marry at 10? All these questions shall be answered, but first, to know all this, we have to start at the beginning. At birth, two important roles are performed. The first is that of the lady giving birth. If you've ever given birth, you might just know how painful it can be to push out a human being. Since it was so painful, the Aztecs would see this act of childbirth as a woman's form of combat. Without fighting through the pain, the baby could never be born, and the lady would almost certainly die. In the unfortunate case where the mother-to-be dies, their soul would be honored into the sky, and was awarded with greeting the sun as a set for the night. On the other hand, if they were triumphant in this battle, they would bring life into the world and live to tell the tale. Seeing one baby is good and all, but if you see two babies, you should probably start running. The result of twins meant the unfortunate demise of one of them in order to make sure the parents' lives weren't at risk. As to why such a thing would be allowed to happen is up to speculation. In my own opinion, not official information in any way, it could have been done to ensure that the family didn't starve. Seeing how two babies at once meant multiple mouths to feed, and could have been seen as a higher probability the mother would soon die. The second most important role during this moment is that of the midwife. Midwives weren't just there to make sure everything went smoothly. Rather, they'd make sure to provide offerings to the goddesses to ensure a smooth birth, and would be quite involved in the naming process. Unlike our societies where we're given names based on that of our parents, or of personal preferences, the Aztecs named their babies according to the day they were born. I would talk about how the calendar works, but it's too complicated to talk about in this video, so I'll save it for another time. But as to why they could name the kids based on the day, is because each day had a unique name. After the governmental name was given, the midwives would wait 4 days before finally giving the child their personal name, which was done in a ritual where she'd bathe the child and 3 random little boys shouted out the kid's name. Depending on the sex of the child, they'd be given symbols on their hands that would represent their future life. If male, they'd be given symbols based on their father's profession and war. If female, they'd be given symbols such as a distaff, a basket, and a broom. If you couldn't tell, this was foreshadowing for their gender roles. After this part of the ritual, the umbilical cord would be buried under one of 2 objects, a shield for a boy, or a metate for a girl. Gender, yes gender, was not inherent for infants. This had to be summoned through rituals such as this, and taught by the parents. Skipping ahead a few years, around 5, a girl would start being taught how to hold and use a spindle and distaff for future weaving. As they got older, their tasks became greater and reflected their roles in society. As girls, they tend to the household chores, such as making sure the house stayed clean, and would aid their mother not just in spinning cloth, but also preparing the food. Cooking was fundamental to being a woman. If the children disobeyed, punishments were given to fit the crime. That is to say, they were similar to back when parents could actually beat the hell out of their kids. An example of one of the more gruesome punishments, typically given when kids really stepped out of line, they'd be forced to inhale pepper fumes. Around the ages of 10, they'd finally be allowed to attend school at either Ecalmecac or Tlalpochcalli. Here they'd be taught to dance, sing, and use instruments specifically for when they attended a ritual in the future. But, as with most other civilizations, this was also a time when a girl stopped being a child and prepared for their adolescence. Between the ages of 10 and 15, girls would be considered ready for marriage. But typically they married around 14 or 15. Nowadays this is extremely taboo, and honestly it is quite f***ing weird how humanity was okay with this for thousands of years. But to put this grim subject into a historical light, we have to take into consideration the context. During these centuries, human life was basically over as quickly as it began. The average life expectancy was around 30 years old, which meant you only had 10 years to be a kid before being an adult for the preceding 10 and an old geezer at the remaining. So it was crucial for women to conceive children as soon as possible. But how was marriage arranged? Well, it all starts with the boy. Typically, men would be seen as ready for marriage around 20 years old, during which their parents would then talk to an elder female matchmaker. She'd make it her mission to go around town finding the most suitable teenage bride to be. Then, once she found her, she'd negotiate with the girl's parents. If successful, a soothsayer would determine the best time for these kids to marry based on the day, because if they married on the wrong day, they weren't gonna last very long. Divorce was very much an option. Now, for the wedding ceremony. There were 2 parts to the ceremony, the public ceremony and the private ceremony. On the first day, an all-day feast was prepared by the bride-to-be's mother and female relatives. Then food, drink, flowers, and tobacco were given to the attendees in a specific order. At sunset, the bride was bathed and clothed in a special dress. Afterwards, one of the worst parts, besides the bride being an actual child, was that she'd be given a lecture by the groom's elders. From here, she'd be carried by the groom's family all the way to his house. In the second part of the ceremony, the couple would literally tie the knot by wrapping their two capes together as a symbol of their union. Inside the house would be waiting 2 old men and 2 old women, usually elders from both sides of the family, who would feed the couple before feeding themselves. After this, the couple would be left alone for 4 days. We're not going to be talking about those 4 days. On the 4th day, another feast was prepared and marked the end of the wedding ceremonies, marking the girl's transition as a woman. Now being a woman, what did the rest of her life look like? Well, unfortunately, life's choices were pretty narrow, but didn't mean a woman couldn't do well in the world. Women were expected to do 3 things: maintain the home, provide finances, and childbirth. Seeing as we've already covered childbirth, we'll proceed to the maintenance of the home. As a lady, the preparation of food was one of the crucial roles. In times of war, women were expected to make provisions for the large Aztec armies, so they did contribute to Aztec wars. Women would also make sure that the home was kept nice and neat with the use of a broom. According to the Aztecs, the broom symbolized the domestic weapon against the spirit realm. If the house was dirty and unattended, it provoked evil spirits to invade and create chaos. A bit of domestic propaganda, but you know, what can you do? Women also battled evil spirits by spreading incense in their home with the use of a tool known as a censer, which looked like a stick with a bowl at the end of it that held burning copal. Once the house was well maintained, women would then do the most important activity needed for a family's well-being: sewing. If you've seen the Aztec Markets video I made a while back, if you didn't, don't worry, you might know that the Aztec society had no specific currency. To the Aztecs, currency was quite fluid and could come in a variety of different ways, and the most expensive of which was clothing. Unlike other societies where women depended on the men for survival, women could pretty much maintain themselves. Of course, they still had to be married, unfortunately, but when it came to the breadwinners of the household, no one could outmatch the ladies. Females used their weaving techniques to design beautiful forms of clothing, and with it, it allowed them to not only pay taxes, but practically anything they needed. Even noble women, who didn't need to worry about paying taxes, would participate in the creation of textiles, since it not only expressed their artistic capabilities, but also created an ever-increasing money supply. Cacao beans were the other form of currency, but when it came to big purchases, textiles were the way to go. Not only were women the moneymakers of this society, but also engaged in selling, and could even administrate at the markets. As administrators, they'd make sure products maintained a good price, tribute was given to the local lord, and the army was well provisioned. They could also perform other tasks such as becoming physicians, which was quite important for civilization to have. Something else women benefited from in this society was independent personal property. When parents died, all their wealth and personal property was divided equally amongst their kids, something very few other civilizations did. Women could also become priests, but was quite rare, as they would then be encouraged to leave to get married. There was also prostitution, but that's a pretty clear-cut case. Although life for a woman in Aztec society could be seen as limited in terms of status, it didn't mean they weren't important. Women were not only mothers and housekeepers, but artisans, financial providers, and vocal business dealers. They maintained order not only in their homes, but even in markets. They enjoyed rights and freedoms that even women in the more quote-unquote sophisticated societies of Europe didn't have until recently. They were a crucial element to the growth of an empire and society. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider leaving a like, comment, and if you're interested in more videos like this, maybe subscribe. Anyways, that's it for me today. Later.